We're talking about Ellen Greenberg, who was found violently attacked. I've been doing this for 45 years, and I'd never seen this kind of suicide.
Mistake after mistake, nothing was properly investigated.
I do believe that she was strangled, which is a whole nother layer to prove this was not suicide.
If this case is not reopened and investigated, this would be a terrible miscarriage of justice. Last night, we began telling the story of a bright young teacher named Ellen Greenberg. She was killed back in January 2011. She was looking forward to marrying her fiancé that summer. The night of her death, she filled up her car with a full tank of gas and sent out her save the dates for the wedding. Her death was first ruled a homicide, quickly changed to a suicide, and her parents, Joshua and Sandy, just won a 14-year battle to have the City of Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office reinvestigate her cause of death. Ellen's parents, Joshua and Sandy, say it's not about speculating who did it, but getting the case reinvestigated as a homicide. And we're going to talk about how to make that happen tonight, but first, here's a look at what we discussed last night. Imagine receiving a call from the police and being told your young daughter is dead. You also find out it was 20 stab wounds. That was just the beginning of a 14-year nightmare for the parents of 27-year-old Ellen Greenberg. The medical examiner initially ruled the death a homicide, but then it was mysteriously changed to suicide. Nancy Grace is one of Ellen's fiercest advocates.
How can this young woman stab herself in the back of the neck, the back of the head? There's a huge gash up here, Dr. Phil.
This wasn't someone that was prone to self-hatred and rage.
No, Dr. Phil.
Joining us now are Ellen's parents, Joshua and Sandy Greenberg. It was first ruled a homicide, and then it changed. What happened?
District attorney's assistants and the medical examiners had a meeting.
And the police.
And there was no record of this meeting. The medical examiner changed it to suicide.
But it's now been reopened.
They are going to re-look at the case now. I don't trust the city at all.
I want all three of you to respond to the chilling 911 call made by Ellen's fiance.
Look at her chest and tell me if it's going up and down, up and down.
I don't see her moving.
Willing to do CPR with me over the phone so they can...
I have to, right?
Okay, so get her flat on her back, bare her chest, okay? You want to rip her shirt off. Rip
Oh,
it
my
off.
God, she stabbed herself.
Where?
She fell with a knife. Oh, no, her knife's sticking out.
Her what?
There's a knife sticking out of her heart.
Dr. Phil, that is where we first hear the word stab herself. Suicide first emerges.
The handle was a good 5-6 inches protruding from her chest. You couldn't miss it if you looked at her body.
We're now adding Guy DeAndre. He's a former Philadelphia prosecutor.
Police officers immediately determined this to be a suicide with almost zero investigation. So crime scene was not called to the scene.
I know she was murdered. And Shapiro, you were in the AG's office. You wouldn't open this case. Now you're the governor. Here's your chance to finally do the right thing, Shapiro.
One thing we know for sure is Ellen Greenberg lost her life. Suicide happens. We know that. It happens at a tragically high rate. It very seldom happens with women stabbing themselves. When they do use a knife to take their own lives, it's usually involving slashing their wrist. Oftentimes there are exploratory cuts as they try to get up their courage to do it, and then there is the fatal cut. They don't tend to stab themselves 20 times, and seldom do they stab themselves in the back or the back of the head. It just doesn't happen. I've been doing this for 45 years, and I'd never, ever seen this kind of suicide by a woman or a man for that matter. This is a rarity. It just doesn't happen. And I'm here with Guy DeAndrea, former DA, Nancy Grace, a host of Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, and we have Ellen's parents, Joshua and Sandy. Ellen's fiance made mention of mental health and said people need to not ignore the mental health aspects of this. Do you, as parents, believe that your daughter was suicidal? Did you see any signs of her being suicidal?
No, I made a deal with Ellen that if she went to a psychiatrist and the psychiatrist and her worked out a situation where she could go home, she could go home.
Why did you feel like she needed to see a psychiatrist?
Because I didn't know what was wrong.
Why did you think something was wrong?
Well, why do you want to come home when you're going to get sending out cards that say, save the state for a marriage? It's too much of a dichotomy of actions for me to accept. I'm sorry.
So the fact that she wanted to come home told you that she was under stress, she was having issues and wanted to return to the nest.
I got the impression that she wasn't moving home, that she wanted to come home and visit.
Okay.
So we both saw it a little bit differently. She was very overwhelmed with her classroom and the stress of teaching, which I couldn't really understand. And we just figured by seeing a psychiatrist, it's a safe space for her to sort her feelings out, and maybe it would be helpful to her.
Give me a few minutes. Can I have a few minutes, please?
You certainly can. Absolutely.
Number one, I knew something was wrong. Her behavior had changed. I didn't think it was anything little. So we sent her to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist diagnosed her of having anxiety, not depression. The psychiatrist said she was not suicidal. About a year later, I learned about a very interesting incident. Ellen had approached a friend of ours, and she wanted to leave her apartment and move into the friend's house. And when the friend said something about, is Sam coming with you? Ellen walked away. Now, I didn't find that out till a year later, but it just substantiated my feeling that something was really wrong here. Something was beyond my scope. I was a periodontist. I wasn't a psychologist or psychiatrist. I wasn't an MD, but I knew something was wrong with my daughter that was not normal. Yes, I was only interested in my daughter and her job when it started, but I learned. I'm going to add something to Dr. Phil. You also know, Dr. Phil, that when women stab themselves, do they stab themselves through their clothing? No. They open up their blouses or whatever, and they stab themselves directly into the shirt. So that made no sense also. That was something, because when we started this investigation or our journey here, we approached Cyril Wecht, a noted forensic pathologist, and he talked about the suicide, how unrelated it was, and how few there were where women used anything like a knife to commit suicide, like you said. The wrists or drugs.
I knew Cyril Wecht well, and he was very wise in these matters. And you're right, they wouldn't stab through their clothes. And Guy, are you hearing anything about a psychiatrist being involved or whatever that countermands your belief as a former DA that changes your attitude that this case should be reopened?
No, and in fact, to the point of mental health and suicidal ideations, or at least potential, I had a huge question when I reviewed this file back in 2015 and 16. There was an indication in the report, in the file, that the FBI, RCFL, investigated Ellen's devices, and they returned a report saying there was nothing of significance found. In other words, there were no suicide searches on her devices. Years later, after I'm gone from the DA's office and the file is at the Attorney General's office, I learned that there's dozens of pages that they're saying exist that Ellen was searching for painless suicide. And the one question I had for them was, where was this coming from? Because that was in no one's file, as of 2017 when I left the district attorney's office. And no one has answered that question. And I find it very troubling that you have the FBI laboratory saying no suicide searches, and now others in law enforcement saying there were. But no, to answer your question more specifically, there was nothing about what I learned about Ellen's life and then some of the mental health, issues, if you'll even want to call them that. She had some anxiety. Nothing would lead me to believe that she had suicidal ideations and that she took her own life.
Let's hear directly from her psychiatrist. And she saw a psychiatrist named Dr. Berman. And here are her notes. January 12, 2011. Wants things in control. My whole life, hard worker. Anxious, not sleeping. Job sucks. January 17th. She wants to quit, but mom and fiance don't want her to. She can get out of contract with 2 weeks' notice. She wants to start work on something. She starts thinking about everything else. Not suicidal. January 19th. Way better. Feels 75% better. Agrees she should just get through till June. She tends to walk around compulsively, neatening up. These are the notes. I can tell you, having been in private practice before, those are not the notes of someone that has someone on suicide precaution or recognizes someone is in danger of harming themselves or others. And listen, there's a lot of research, sadly, about suicidal ideation, suicidality. And when we come back, I'm going to go through the warning signs and what suicidal people show and ask Joshua and Sandy to tell me if they saw any of these signs on the part of their daughter, because there's enough research to tell us these people do wave red flags if they're going to take their lives. And we're going to go over that right after the break. I spent countless nights tossing and turning, waking up exhausted and feeling behind on everything that mattered. But then I found Beam's Dream Powder. It's a science-backed, healthy nighttime blend packed with ingredients shown to improve sleep, so you can wake up refreshed and ready to take on the day. Now, Dream is made with a powerful blend of all-natural ingredients: reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin. Beam has already improved over 17.5 million nights of sleep, helping people across the country wake up and feel their best. Here's the deal. Beam is giving my listeners the ultimate Patriot discount of 40% off. Try their best-selling Dream Powder and get up to 40% off for a limited time. Go to shopbeam.com/Dr. Phil and use code Dr. Phil at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/Dr. Phil and use code Dr. Phil for up to 40% off. Support an American company. Invest in yourself and start getting your best sleep tonight. Life is full of surprises, and emergencies often strike when we least expect them. But preparation is key, and that's where Jace Case comes in. With Jace Case, you'll have essential emergency prescription medications right at your fingertips, ready when you need them most. Whether it's an unexpected illness or a travel mishap, having the right meds on hand can turn a potential crisis into just a minor inconvenience. Don't let the unexpected catch you off guard. Jace Case gives you peace of mind so you can tackle life surprises with confidence. Be ready. Take charge today. Head over to jace.com. That's JASE.com. And when you check out, use the code PHIL, spelled PHIL, to get a discount on your order and to have the right meds on hand the moment you need them. Okay, I'm back, and we're talking about the tragic death of a young woman that has become a debate where I see none, frankly. And the question is this a suicide or a homicide? Frankly, I don't see the question, but we're talking about whether or not these parents maybe missed something. Now, there were bruises on Ellen that anyone reasonable in doing this would conclude that she had been in some kind of ongoing domestic violence or some kind of relationship because of the different ages of the bruises to the arms and body, suggesting that she had been grabbed and held in a violent way across time because of the different aging of the bruises, correct?
That's correct. All from her torso down to almost her legs, Dr. Phil. As you said, she had numerous bruising in all stages of healing. And I brought that to the attention of both the police department and to the medical examiner's office. And the response I got, because this was clear signs of most likely domestic violence, but certainly someone repeatedly assaulting Ellen, I brought this to their attention, and flippantly, I was told that she does Pilates, and that's the reason she has all of these bruisings all over her body.
Yeah. Joshua, Sandy, did you guys have any knowledge at all of her being in a domestic violence situation?
The only thing we had that was unusual is Ellen kept asking, she wanted to go home. And we didn't understand why she would want to go home if we're planning a wedding. So I made a deal with her. Sandy and I would hire a psychiatrist since I couldn't handle the psychological part of this. Ellen would go to the psychologist, and psychiatrist, Dr. Berman said, they would make a deal that Ellen would go home. I had two things I was worried about, my daughter and my daughter's job. That was it. I had no evidence, inclination, fear, or thoughts of abuse. That's not where I come from in a marriage or a relationship.
I have to tell you, Joshua, Sandy, I think the two of you were extremely attentive. I think you were dialed in to your daughter. I think you proceeded with an abundance of caution here and suggesting that she see someone when she's facing the challenges of getting into a marriage and handling a job that's high stress. I wish I had millions of more parents like the two of you. Not only do I think you didn't miss anything, I think you went above and beyond every caution, precaution, and care that parents would take. So God bless you for being as dialed in as you were. When people are suicidal or they're entertaining suicidal thoughts, they tend to talk about suicide as an option. There's a myth that people that talk about it don't do it. That's wrong. People that talk about it do it. They research ways to kill themselves. They feel or talk about hopelessness. You hear them talk about, I'm a burden, there's just no way out. And they will tell you they feel like they're a burden to other people, like things would be better off if I just wasn't here. They feel trapped, backed into a corner, either legally or with financial problems, that they've disappointed people in their life and they just can't fix the situation and they're in unbearable pain, things like that. They tend to withdraw from friends, family, church activities. They pull back from life altogether. They tend to sleep more. They self-medicate with drugs or alcohol. All of these things tend to occur within that population a lot. And when they get close, you'll see them start to tell people goodbye that they love. I mean, more than just, hey, see ya. It's like they actually go see them and they kind of make a formal goodbye. They give away prized possessions. There's depression, anxiety, and oftentimes shame and anger and rage. And they typically have prior attempts. And they start to engage in high-risk behavior because they don't value themselves anymore. So they'll start driving erratically or doing things that are way out of character that are high risk. And sometimes you will see a substantial shift to a very positive attitude for a short period of time because they've found a way out. We call it short-termers attitude. It's like, hey, I've found my remedy. So you'll see a lift in attitude all of a sudden for no apparent reason because they're short-termers. And so they'll get happy for no reason all of a sudden. And those are some of the signs, and I don't see anywhere in the psychiatrist's notes or in her history or behavior a cluster of any of those behaviors. Did either of you see any of those behaviors?
No, and I'd like to bring up two things. I know I'm a pain in the neck. Number one, let's look at the computers. The computers were examined by the FBI and found no searches for painless suicide. That was before her death. Number two, after her death, a teacher took over her teaching job. And that teacher said everything in Ellen's teachers, whatever you want to call it, was in perfect order. So although she was using school as a stressful, let's say it was a stressful thing, instead of saying she was being abused, it's not true. Ellen still was maintaining her job quality, for lack of a better word. And I don't think somebody who commits suicide would have been maintaining such a meticulous job quality after her death. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not an expert, but I want to bring out those two things.
Okay.
Thank you.
You may not be an expert, but you're certainly observant, and you know your daughter. And Nancy, a woman who's researching painless suicide, at the end of that say, well, after looking at all that, my conclusion is I'll just stab myself 20 times. I kind of think that's the last option somebody would take.
I wanted to bring up to you, you go through all this, and as Guy DeAndrea said, there was no evidence of suicide searches until years later. And this is after, according to the FBI, no suicide searches. And then years later, the searches turn up. I don't like that. That said, you go through all that to figure out how can I kill myself painlessly? Oh, I'll just stab myself 20 times in the back. That didn't happen. And another thing I wanted to mention, I think Josh and Sandy were talking about friends of Ellen's. She was at a point where she was not only asking mom and dad, look, I know I'm in this luxury condo with the man of my dreams, but I want to quit my job and move home. That didn't sound like Ellen. And we tracked down the friend, and she asked the friend, hey, can I move in with you? That Joshua just described. And the friend says, what are you talking about? And she says, this is stress from school. And the friend says, you're teaching first graders. Why are you stressed out about getting their grades in? It just, none of it made sense. It's not like they were in law school at Harvard. They were first graders going to midterm. So everything Josh and Sandy said is correct. And the friend said, why do you want to move out of your condo, your apartment? Are you going to bring the fiance with you? And she just blew it up, wouldn't answer.
Yeah, none of it's adding up. None of it's adding up.
Suicide.
And I want Guy to talk about the scene a little bit, and then we're going to focus on where we go from here. We'll be right back. Let's cut to the chase. Your savings could be in serious trouble. When Elon Musk is out here warning us to brace for temporary hardship, you might want to listen. I trust Preserve Gold to safeguard my accounts, and I urge you to do the same. They're the only precious metals company I recommend. Are you going to sit back and hope for the best or take control of your financial future? Text Dr. Phil to 50505 to get your free precious metals guide from Preserve Gold. With gold prices recently breaking records and analysts predicting this trend to continue through 2025, you cannot afford to wait. As a bonus, you can get up to $15,000 with a qualified purchase from Preserve Gold. So don't wait. Text Dr. Phil to 50505. That's DRPHIL to 50505 today. We're back and talking about a very important case here. We're talking about Ellen Greenberg, who was found violently attacked, in my opinion, on January 26th of 2011. She had at least 20 knife wounds and lost her life at that time. And there's so much wrong with this situation. And this wasn't some podunk town. This was a city that had a sophisticated police department. certainly had resources available to them. And we're here with the benefit of a very sophisticated district attorney that has investigated this specific case and has problems with the crime scene. We've talked about the victim here. We've talked about whether or not she was suicidal or not. The fact that the wounds are not consistent with taking your own life by any stretch of the imagination. I can tell you from a psychological standpoint, the profile does not fit someone that has a self-harm or suicidal profile, just in my opinion. And then there are inconsistencies in the way this thing was investigated and in the scene where she was discovered. And Guy, from a DA's perspective, when you look at this from a criminology standpoint, why would this scene not be looked at as a crime scene? And why did it not send off warning bells when the scene didn't look right?
It's a great question, Dr. Phil. When I started looking into this years after her death, and I'm not happy with saying it, but I'm confident in saying that this is not a suicide, it's a homicide at this point. When they arrived, they so quickly said this was a suicide, which shut down all police protocol. Meaning when they arrived on scene, police protocol would have been seeing what you're looking at to bring in the crime scene unit. Let's start, I know we talked a lot about the latch, but the latch in and of itself, before you even get to the kitchen, is still connected to the door frame. So if you're interviewing the fiance and he tells you, which he did, I kicked the door in, it can't be true because both parts of the locking mechanism are still attached to the door. One of those two pieces would have to come off, and a trained investigator should have known that. That should have raised a red flag. Get to the kitchen. You had a 911 phone call which describes the scene. One of two things are true about that phone call. Sam was either not in the room when he made it, or he was and was describing things not as they were. In other words, she was not laying flat on her back on the floor. It would be impossible. And I mean that I care about trauma. I don't care what people might say about people react differently to trauma. No matter what you're going through, you could not miss this knife sticking out of her heart. You're looking at your fiance. You're supposed to be at least attempting to see what's wrong. How do you miss a knife sticking out of her heart? And so the description of it all should have raised red flags. Holding, and as Nancy Gray said, holding a white tail in your hand that there isn't a drop of blood on. Looking at a scene with 20-some wounds. That should have been a red flag. Looked like a blitzkrieg attack to the back of her head with an object. That's not someone doing that to themselves. That should have been a red flag that this was done to her. Very close in time after the reviewing the body and seeing the various stages of bruising all over her body, seeing the bruising around her collar, bone, and neck, all should have been red flags. All of this was, I don't even know what I want to say about it. It wasn't swept under the rug. It was ignored. It was buried. And then it was doubled down on the fact that this was a suicide. And so because of, mistake after mistake after mistake, nothing was properly investigated as it should have been from the inception of a police arriving on this scene.
Okay, but why not? Obviously, a call goes out, and I assume cruisers, whatever, nearest the scene, somebody was dispatched. What would be the possible motive?
The best I heard from anyone when I was investigating this is the fiance and his uncle, who was an attorney, who were on scene, were credible. They made a credibility determination that this is how it happened. Meaning, when Sam left, she was alive and well. When he returned, the apartment was locked, deadbolted from the inside, which we know it wasn't a deadbolt, but that it was deadbolted from the inside. They chose to believe that narrative without using a single investigative tool at their disposal, and instead just listened to that version, wrote down suicide, and then ultimately convinced the medical examiners who correctly determined this was a homicide, but convinced them to change it to a suicide.
Okay, Nancy, Dr. Wayne Ross had a very significant finding, and I want to discuss that with you when we come back. Well, we're back, and we're talking about the death of Ellen Greenberg. It was originally ruled a homicide, then changed to a suicide, and we're trying to get this case absolutely reopened right now. And Nancy, Dr. Wayne Ross reported strangulation marks on the neck. We just heard Guy talking about bruises on the torso and on the arm. And Dr. Ross was hired by the Greenbergs to review the case and indicated there were strangulation marks around the neck. It just seems like there's a mountain of evidence here that any trier of fact, any investigator would say, we got to dig into this. We've got to look into this. None of this is consistent with suicide. What do you make of this?
Dr. Phil, you know I'm a crime victim. My fiance was murdered shortly before our wedding.
Right.
When I first heard about Ellen's case, I didn't want it to be true. I spent my whole career, well, since Keith's murder, seeking justice. And my most treasured witnesses have been state's witnesses, police, LA law enforcement, medical examiners to help me prove my case. I didn't want this to be true. I kept thinking, I'm going to find something and it's going to explain all of this. And I'll know that Ellen really did commit suicide and the police didn't do this thing. I never found it, Phil. In fact, the more I looked, the worse it got. Now, this doctor, Dr. Wayne Ross, is a forensic pathologist. He is a neuropathologist. He pointed out bruises on strap muscles. What is that? If you strangle somebody, you will have bruises here and around here. He found those not just visible, but subdural, under the skin. That takes a lot of force. Now, one theory, and I believe Joshua agrees with me, that she was not only stabbed, but strangled as well. Strangulation was not the cause of death, not the COD, but how do I know that? Because she did not have, here you have petechia, little blood vessels in your eye, and when you are asphyxiated in any way, they burst.
Right.
That didn't happen. But I do believe that she was strangled, not to death, and stabbed, which is a whole nother layer to prove this was not suicide. She did not strangle herself. Again, Dr. Phil, I tried to see a suicide. I tried to believe in the investigation, but I can't.
It just seems like it's just piling up and piling up and piling up, and there's just so much that if this case is not reopened and investigated with all the technology that we have and the ability to put all of this evidence on the table and create a timeline and a crime scene profile here, and it's not too late to do so, this would be a terrible, terrible miscarriage of justice. And I want to hear from the parents about why this is so important to them. It's not going to bring Ellen back, but it is very important. And I want to hear the parents talk about why this is so critically important to them right after the break. Joshua and Sandy Greenberg have spent 14 years fighting to get to the truth, fighting for justice. Clearly, they want someone to be held accountable for what they believe is the murder of their daughter. I know you want justice. You also want the truth to come out. Sandy, why is this so important to you after 14 years?
Well, I've always felt that I wanted to clear Ellen's name. It just on principle, she deserves that. She was a resident of Philadelphia. She paid taxes. She was a human life. She was our daughter. But she could be, you know, your daughter, God forbid, or your sister or your aunt or, you know, someone. We've had to tease through 14 years of lies and being held back, dodged at every angle through the politics in Pennsylvania. And I want to get to the bottom of it. And I think at this point, there are a lot more eyes and ears listening and watching. And Ellen just deserves justice, and I'm not going away. In fact, I feel that whoever's controlling the strings in this investigation picked the wrong parents.
Joshua, why is this so important to you?
I was brought up a certain way. I was brought up to do the right thing. Our struggle, our mission, my mission and my wife's, to find out the truth about our daughter's death is a mission. I know it was wrong. I knew it was wrong. And I couldn't walk away. There were times when money was involved and I couldn't walk away. This is the right thing to do when you lose a daughter like we did, to find out what happened, why it happened, who happened it. Right now, all we're trying to do is if the death certificate change to undecided or homicide. It's the right thing to do. And I was the guy in high school who drove everyone home when they were drunk. I did things like that. I don't know if that means anything to you. If you guys understand what I'm saying, but it was my responsibility to make sure everyone got home. So I didn't drink. But I do the right thing. I don't lie. I don't cheat. I do the right thing. And it was my daughter, our daughter, that I was fighting for, that I had a mission to find out what's going on. It was the way I was brought up.
Since the declaration that Dr. Osborne signed was over 2 weeks ago, we had not heard a peep from the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's office, and her death certificate remains suicide. Now, we asked for it to be expeditious, but I don't know. I'm not waiting another 14 years.
No, we're not.
This is just so wrong in every way. And they need to be held accountable. They talk about evidence-based truth finding. The evidence is here. If you don't look at the evidence, you're not going to find it.
One of the things I've always questioned about in this case is, why do people believe me? Why don't they believe their elected officials, their governor, the mayor, the police commissioner? Why do they believe us? And that's a scary thing when you think about this country being so great and the people who run the country being so great. Why do you believe me?
This is not just an emotional plea. You certainly have facts. This isn't just denial on your part. You've done the digging. You've done the facts. Nancy and Guy have been very empirical and factual about this, and I can't disagree with your position here. It clearly seems to me to have so much data to support your thoughts on this, and I'm going to add mine to it after the break. We've been talking about the tragic death of Ellen Greenberg. Nancy Grace from Merit TV's own Crime Stories with Nancy Grace has actually written a book about this, What Happened to Ellen. Nancy, what are the next steps here? Your book comes out soon, and I want everybody to read this because, look, we have to stand up for this kind of thing. And your book digs into this. I want everybody to read it. There will be links on our website here at drphil.com and merittv.com for people to order that. But I want to talk about next steps. What do you see happening next in this case?
Dr. Phil, thank you about the book. All our proceeds are going to National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The reason I've spent so much time working and researching and investigating this case is to get to the next step to which you are referring, the reopening of the investigation. That's where we've got to get. What Josh and Sandy did is amazing. And I'd like to point out they've been trying to do it for 14 years. And at the eve of trial, Dr. Phil, you've been in a lot of trials as an expert witness. They're striking the jury, Dr. Phil. They're vadiring the jury. And before they would put that medical examiner on the stand where he would be asked what happened in that closed door meeting, before he got up there, they settled. Why? Why did they settle? Why did they want this kept secret? It's going to be very difficult to get a municipality like Philadelphia to open up and tell what really happened. They're doing everything they can to keep it quiet. And this goes all the way up to Shapiro. I'm telling you, he was the AG at the time. He wouldn't reopen this case. Next step, an independent investigation, not Philly, not Pennsylvania, the feds. We've got to get the feds in on this investigation. That's the next step and the only hope for the truth.
And if that happens and everything that we've talked about here gets put on the table, then it seems to me that there can be some justice brought to bear here. And Joshua, Sandy, I know that's what you want. You want a bright light turned on over this case so justice can be had. As we say, it's not going to bring your daughter back, but you can get some justice here, and that's what you're looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's what you deserve. And Guy, I can't thank you enough. You've put a lot of time into this and used obviously excellent investigative skills. Do you think they'll reopen this case, Guy?
I still will hold out cautious hope because it is the right thing to do. It is the just thing to do. And the reason it's just is because it's the truth. The evidence is overwhelming. I would have no problem if I was still in the district attorney's office charging this as a homicide today. And so I can only hope that they finally, 14 years later, will do the just and truthful thing.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and I 100% support reopening this case and letting all of this evidence see the light of day. We only had 2 hours to discuss this case, but Nancy and I will be keeping tabs on Joshua and Sandy's path through the legal system. I have a feeling that Ellen's story is going to resonate with everybody that's following it, and I'm going to keep a national spotlight on her case until this family gets the peace that they seek. I want to thank all of my guests for coming tonight, talking about this painful situation, and just know that we hear you and we're committed to joining you on this journey to get justice. We know that it won't bring your precious daughter back, but we also know that having some justice will perhaps ease the pain. Thank you all for being here tonight, and if you have any information about this case, then please share it with us at drphil.com or Merit TV. Let us know anything that you know that may help. You can also contact the local police department. We appreciate you being here. We'll see you next time.